Everyone watching live with us had a wonderful Thanksgiving week. Hope y'all got a little break of some kind anyway, at least those of you in the US. I know those of you north of the border had your turkey the previous month in October. But let's see, we got out of town for the week. We were in Colorado, which was kind of fun, and we did a little live stream from there. Maybe some of you saw it. I know probably not a lot of people did because it was a holiday week, but there you go. And today we have a fun topic that I think is going to provide some value to everybody, whether you are a new podcaster or a seasoned one, because I think this topic can happen to just about every podcaster at some point. I think it does happen to people maybe more initially in the beginning, but I think especially after you've recorded many hundreds of episodes, as I know some of you live with us today have, and as we have. I was just actually had a call just before this session, just a prospect, and it came up in context for some very good reason that I've recorded over 1,000 podcast episodes in my day. And this definitely happens. Tracy, you've recorded probably 2 or 3 times that compared to me. You're like the hyper podcaster.
I know every year I kind of, in January, when I redo my bio, I check the number and see like how many interviews and recordings did I do over the course of last year. And I just added to the number. So in January of last year, it was 2,600. So yeah, I've probably done at least another 300-400. So I'm probably pretty close to 3,000 right now.
I bet you are. You are. We're doing this one once a week. So, all right. So let's start recording our episode and provide that value. And then we'll open it up for Q&A to those live here with us on Zoom. Obviously, those of you out there in LinkedIn or Facebook, the YouTube, the various places, obviously your only ability to participate is to make a comment there, and feel free to do that. Those here live with us can actually ask questions when we get to that point. So Tracy, why don't I lead off and then you introduce our topic to our audience. Sound good?
Yep.
All right. Hey everyone, welcome to Feed Your Brand. I'm Tom Hazzard, along with my co-host and better half, Tracy Hazzard. And today we're going to have some fun talking about a topic that is, I think, very important one, and everyone's going to experience it at some point in their podcasting journey. Some of them in the beginning up front, and others will experience it after they've been podcasting for a few years at different times. So Tracy, why don't you help share with our audience what we're going to talk about today?
Yeah. So today we're talking about removing your podcast creative blocks to help get your show in the flow, right? And so sometimes that is at the beginning, you need to get into that flow of things. And sometimes you lose your flow. And this is how pod fading happens, right? So like you can fall apart at those. So creative blocks is something Tom and I know really well. I mean, we went to art school. We have creativity as a part of everything that we do. And this is kind of funny because we were just having this conversation about it. I was just evaluating our creative director from an employee standpoint, and not that I'm going to out his review here or anything like that, but some people have the belief system and have better times of day, better times of year, better processes when they're more creative than others. And they use that as kind of I'm just not in the mood to write. I'm just not in the mood to podcast. And so we don't actually do that. Tom and I don't have that as a part of our process. We actually can pretty much turn creativity on like a faucet. Would that be accurate, Tom?
I think that is accurate. I would tend to say it a different way. I find for you and me, creativity is compulsive. I have trouble shutting it off.
Right. Yeah. I think that's probably actually more the case. Yeah. We're always on from a creativity standpoint. That's always moving behind the scenes and kind of happening, but we can't turn the flow on faster.
You definitely can. And there are times, look, I'm not trying to say we are, prolific in this way in terms of creativity. No, we come up with blocks too. In fact, it's kind of ironic that normally we plan these topics for our episodes out at least a week or more in advance. And so our social media team can do some prep. And a little bit of peek behind the curtain for those of you listening to this episode or watching the video is that we didn't prepare this one very far ahead of time. We had a little bit of a block coming. All right, what are we going to talk about this week? Right. Didn't have that depth out there. And so I think it's kind of funny that we're talking about creative blocks after we had a minor one. It didn't take very long. I mean, what was it? A day maybe and in terms of total time put into it, what, an hour or two maybe of a block, and that was it.
Well, I'm going to say that there wasn't a block. There was a failure in work habits. And so like, I think that this is something that goes around everything. So while we're really going to talk about the 3 top blocks that Tom and I see pretty consistently, the most common ones, the reality is that if you don't get your work or your personal habits aligned, or they're just not working for you, it complicates everything. So I was trying to stay out of it, right? Like normally I push this process through for you, for the team, for everything, and keep this on schedule. But I had such a busy last couple of months that I thought I'm going to take a step back and see if I can get the team to take it over. And the reality is they got themselves all behind. And part of it was that they got behind trying to get input from you as well. So they don't push you as much as I do. Like I'm like, Tom, sit down. We're going to brainstorm the topics and I make it happen. And maybe the team just doesn't feel as comfortable with that kind of pushing their boss, right? And so we need to get them more comfortable that when they're responsible for delivering something and you're the holdup, that they got to make it happen.
Well, and I guess in all fairness, I want to say the team reached out to me and individuals on the team reached out to me and say, hey, what are you thinking are some upcoming good topics? And I've been so darn busy. I just, one of the things that about creative blocks and being creative in general is that while I think creativity, you and I have trouble turning it off most of the time, I think that's true, but there's also something to be said for, and especially when you're a business manager managing creative people, that, damn it, employee, you're going to sit down at your desk and be creative because I'm paying you to, and you're just going to do it. And that's the worst thing you can do for someone that has a job that's in a creative field. You cannot just turn it on like a faucet. And that happened to me a little bit as I was thinking through, well, yeah, we could talk about this, we could talk about that. But I, just being so busy, being forced to sit down, come up with a topic. Yeah, that didn't work too well for me this week.
Well, and I also think that part of it is that if you get yourself into this place where you're not collaborating and it's all on you, that can be harder. So Tom and I have the benefit of having each other. So when one isn't quite as creative as or engaged at the moment in the flow of it, right? Mm-hmm. That's why I talked about this as removing this so that you can get into the flow, right? Removing these creative blocks. But the idea is that the other can spur that on. And so creativity works really well when you have that collaborative environment, when you have a brainstorming, think about it like that. So this is really where I want to say that those of you who have a team and expects your team to do all the hard work, and you're not involved in the process, this can be a recipe for failure. And also then what happens when your team member gets sick? What happens when this is how you also get behind. So you do have to participate in the process. And that's critically important here. And that's, I think, what happened for us here. So your work and personal habits have to work together to make this happen. So that means that you might need to put in a routine, a system, and maybe you also need to build in, for some of you, spontaneity into the process. Like, I honestly, for a creative person, I don't like spontaneity. I need a schedule because so much of our systems around it rely on that schedule of it. So while I do want to have the spontaneity of brainstorming it, that time for the spontaneity is actually scheduled in our program. So I know that sounds counterintuitive to some of you, but some of you require that structure. So if you do require it, make it happen. If you don't, you've got to leave open space. And that's what doesn't happen. Like Tom doesn't have enough open space in his schedule where his brain can be free to think. And that can be counterproductive to the creative process, to brainstorming topic ideas. Whatever that might be, you're not leaving space for that. So you may need to actually schedule in open space in order to allow spontaneity to occur.
I agree with you 100% on that. And I experienced this recently with our creative director, who I needed to come up with copy for a web page. And I just needed to give him the time and space to do it.
Right.
And boy, when he came back with it, holy
awesome.
mackerel, it is fantastic. And you can't force that. You got to give it the time. You got to foster it. Right.
Right.
And
but you also have to
flow.
stay engaged and involved in it. Was
Mhm.
that if he couldn't have enough of your time to have conversations, he's not going to be able to do the job that he needs to do to come up with the idea. So like it also has to do with the fact that you can't just drop this on someone's lap and say, go ahead and come up with the ideas, and not allow them to have access to you and in conversation to be able to like make sure that those ideas are aligned with your business, aligned with your goals, aligned with those things. When those things happen, then all the flow happens through back and forth throughout the company. The other thing that I kind of want to mention here is sort of in the system and the process and the things that you might be doing in the case here is that Tom's not a night person and I'm not a morning person. So we had to structure, there's a reason why this call is in the middle of the day, right? Like, we had to come up with a space that worked for both of us to be able to participate in it at our best. Right.
And so true.
That has to happen for you as well. If you're thinking that like, well, you're not a night person and then you're finally getting to your podcast on your list to recording it and it's at night, it's just not going to happen. This is why we didn't end up with a podcast that was pre-recorded for last week, was because we got so busy and our days got so packed that the only time left was at the very end of the day. And I just cannot make podcast at that time. Can't do it. No matter how hard I could have sat down, and I almost did it. I had some stuff in the oven. I was baking pumpkin cheesecake for Thanksgiving, and I could have, it takes like an hour to cook. I could have sat down at this computer and just absolutely banged out the episode alone, but it wouldn't have worked because that's not the right spirit of the episode we wanted to record last week. And to do it by excluding Tom wouldn't work.
The one we intended to pre-record and live stream. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, we wanted to see what it was like.
And we couldn't find the right time of day for us both to do it. So that experiment never happened. We ended up just going live that day.
Right. We still got it and we still knew what we were going to recording, but we couldn't make it happen because the only time that was allowing us to record because of our busy schedules was a time where he's not conducive to the creativity necessary to do a good episode, to be engaged, to be in the moment of it. So don't make that is like, I'm just going to put it at the bottom of my list and I'll get to it when I get to it. And then have that only time that you have free to do it be something where you're not going to be in your element. You're not going to be good with podcasting. So that doesn't work for you. When you're solo, when you're co-hosting, when you're doing interviews, those can also be really hard because solo is a little easier if you schedule for yourself, but also because you're not holding yourself accountable for it, you let it slip. And so that can be problems. Co-hosts have issues getting schedules together. This is where system, process, making it function. Tom and I will show up live for all of you. So I know there's no way Tom will miss an appointment. He won't cancel on you. He might cancel on me as the co-host, but he won't cancel on you. And that's critically important. And make sure that you force yourself into a system that can make it work for you and force that to happen. So this is something that you really do need to think of. This is why I highly recommend interviews for those of you starting out, because you're not going to allow the creative blocks to get in your way if you have to show up for someone else. You will remove that barrier because you have an obligation that you're willing to keep. And that's really critically important. If these blocks are getting in the way, putting in a system like that or putting in a process of interviews into it, even if eventually you're going to take them away and you're not going to do all interview episodes, that's okay. But in the beginning, if that's what it takes to get you started, put a system in place to make that happen. Put a schedule in place to make that happen. Routine versus freedom may be what's necessary to get rid of a blocker, right? Like that's it, just it.
Well, and to your point, Tracy, I think the routine is really important. So I have a podcast that I did for a couple of years with someone else as a co-host, not you. We're both morning people. So we would always have our schedule at 6 a.m. before we got into the monotony of our days, before things got in the way, we would record from 6 to 7 usually. But I'll tell you, the routine was important to get us together to do it, but we almost always would spend the first 15 minutes going through creatively, what were we inspired by and what were we going to talk about. Sometimes we would plan it ahead, but sometimes we would do it right then. And sometimes we spent the whole hour working through it and not recording an episode because we're working through the creativity of, all right, what are we going to talk about? But we would tee ourselves up with that topic for the next time then. But the routine, I think, is important
that can really work for you.
Mm-hmm.
The other reason, like, look, we have a lot of, I'm going to call it dissension in the podcasting industry about the importance of using a podcast space, using an environment, like going out and recording in a space. There's a reason we abandoned that. Look, I don't criticize studios. Studios have great sound. You've got supportive engineers. Maybe you need that. Maybe that's the thing that will give you the appointment that will make it happen. But for the most part, what we found is that more people use that as an excuse to not record. And so that's why we built the whole system of, we're sending you a microphone. All you got to do is plug it in. Your environment's ready to go. You're ready to podcast when the moment strikes, right? Or when you need to be on. And we did that because we found more people would use that as an excuse that they couldn't get to their space than they would use it as, this is requirement for me, so I will podcast. There's different personalities, right? So use the one that makes you work, right? If you need a space and that's going to make it happen for you, then go to the space. But if you find that that's not working for you, then just plug the darn mic in and get started. So anyway, let's get to our blockers, Tom.
All right.
So we have 3 creative blockers that we see happen again and again and again. Mental block. That's the first one. You have a mental block that is stopping you. Usually it's overthinking and overanalyzing, perfectionism gets into this mental block area. That's kind of perfectionism, while it has an emotional component as well, but the mental side of it must be perfect. So I have a mental block on publishing a book.
You really think it's a mental block? Wow.
I'm positive it's a mental one and not an emotional one. I really looked this through. I've had a lot of publication therapy with my friend Juliette Clark, one of the best publishers ever, right? And part of it is that there tends to be a lot of overthinking for those of you who are hefty podcast listeners. Because you're listeners, you want the perfect experience. You want to create a podcast like somebody else's. You overthink the pieces and parts that you want. This is where it can happen most often. So if this is your issue, recognize it. That's the first part. Recognize it. I have got a mental block here. What am I going to do to remove that mental block? For me, my mental block on publishing a book is not the fact that I'm a gigantic reader and I want to put out this amazing book because I read so much that I do know what a good book looks like and sounds like and reads like, right? Looks like. But the issue for me is that the book world isn't fast enough to keep up with my podcasting information. So I can't publish fast enough to keep up with that. And that's a mental block that I have to get over. I have to get over it and just publish the darn thing, knowing that actually there is an update process, even though it's quite slow in the publication world, but you can update your book.
So your concern is that it's going to age out of freshness or relevance. And that's why you think you have a mental block against the book, right? Whereas a podcast, something changes, you just get on the mic and talk about it and can publish it within a week or two.
Well, for me, by the time I get the book assembled into the pieces and it goes through the editing process, it's already out of date. So when I do my pass through it, I'm making too many edits again because it's already out of date for me. Like that's an issue, right? So this is part of it, is that there are ways around. Remember, we said that there are systems, routines, processes that you can do to change the way that this works for you to remove this mental block. So first off, if it's like, what if I went live instead? So if I'm overthinking like the editing of this, what if I just pushed myself into a live stream situation and then allowed editing to happen at a more comfortable pace afterwards? Because I already put it out there. So now maybe I'm not over editing, overthinking that process. My mental block is starting to be removed. So by bringing in a new perspective on something and a what if this were how it worked, what if this were the way it was, we can help sometimes remove the mental block. And this is something that Julietta and I are actually working on. We're trying to figure out that what if I did it in a different way, then put the whole book together, had it go through an editor, come back to me a month later, and then I look at it again and it's out of date for me because of the speed of information. What if we had a different process?
Well, and so that's
one
I
of the
think,
things we're
point.
looking, right? What if there were a different process for you that would help remove this mental block? That's the perspective you might need.
And I think to that point, Tracy, it's really, if what you're doing isn't working, it's time to change what you're doing and seek another path, seek another process, right? Change things up. When you think about it, if you're stuck, staying there isn't going to make it any better.
Right. So this is a mindset shift and a new perspective shift. So what do you do to shift your mindset? What do you do about this? If you're in that mental block situation, finding that mindset shift, boy, I can't say that, mindset shift is critically important here. Do you need to meditate? Do you need to get a coach in? Do you need to get when we see someone with a mental block in the setup process, not getting started, that's usually when they send me or Tom in. So they send one of us in to kick butt, to basically move you forward, get you out of that block. It's a whole lot easier to move you out of a mindset block, a mental block, than it is an emotional block, which is our second one that we're going to talk about, because an emotional block has deep roots. Right. So mental blocks are something you can easily move out of. So help yourself get into a new perspective, a new mindset, and get someone to help you with that, whether it's help you figure out a system or a coach that just helps you move past whatever's blocking you at this moment in time. But emotional blocks are a lot harder, and they're going to require a lot more shifting, right?
I agree. Yeah. A mental block. That's what I was going to add to that, which you did say to an extent, is that you can get outside help to move you past a mental block. You can absolutely do that. Seek help. It could be a sibling. It could be a parent. It could be a friend. It could be a colleague. Probably in some ways, any of those would work.
And we're here for you
to some extent. And of course, we are here for you as well. And it's just like, it's easier for you and me, Trace, because we have each other. Like you said, one of us is off, we go talk to the other, we get past whatever that mental block is in, more easily.
Well, in keeping with our episode from last week, the harmony of us is that when one's up, one's down, right? Like, so you can do that. So get some help in this way. Show up on our coaching calls here every single week. Show up in the live stream, ask questions, get yourself unstuck from this. This is where we love to put people in the hot seat and help you move through some mental block on something. Well, this is an easier one.
Let's talk about the emotional block, because that one is very hard. I mean, I think people get to points in their lives when there are things that emotionally get in the way. And
so
I don't think it's as easy to get past that.
There's fear, there's confidence, and its embodiment tends to be procrastination. That's what I hear a lot of, is one side of it is procrastination. Another side of it can be lashing out and anger. And so we see a lot of that happen. And then the last version of it is total retreat. So when we see someone go from just slowing down, procrastinating, there's usually an underlying emotional barrier in there that's affecting things. Now, sometimes people get busy. That's number 3. We'll talk about overwhelm and busyness and things like that. But and when it's emotional, that procrastination eventually leads to a total shutdown where they retreat and they don't want to talk about it because they don't want to have to face what's blocking them, the emotional barrier that's blocking them from doing that. Without outing this client, we had a client who was dealing with a whole lot of emotions that had bubbled up for her from various things that were happening in her personal life that actually caused the emotional barrier to her questioning whether or not she had a right to have her voice heard. And that is combination of fear and confidence that pulls together here. And that's why I say fear and confidence are probably the most likely underlying sort of like, it's not the emotion that's happening, but it's part of what's causing the barrier, right? Is that I feel a lack of confidence. I feel fearful. What is causing those? Totally different for every person. What might be happening that it can be a lifetime of lack of confidence, a lifetime of not being confident in the fact that your voice deserves to be heard. We hear that a lot. John Livesay did a great episode with us really early on in the Feed Your Brand podcast, talking about fear blockers and starting a podcast and just getting going and being interviewed and having your voice heard.
And I would think more than anything else, it's the emotional blockers that probably lead to pod fading more often than anything else. I don't know how you feel about that, but to me, I think that it's more than the overwhelm, because we can do things with our routines, and we'll get to overwhelm, but we can do things in our routines to kind of break that or try to give us a safe space that there is not overwhelm. But the emotional part, I think most often is what stops people.
Well, I think it stops people from getting started to begin with. So we do see a lot of this at the very beginning before someone gets their podcast off the ground. So it can be some of that. It can be then continuing on in the fact that you're not getting the positive feedback that you need and require from an emotional standpoint. And that's what causes the pod fade for you. So it could also be, look, I mean, we have it happen. It happens a lot more to the women than the men podcasters, than the male podcasters that we have in our system. But we get a lot of trolls, especially for the YouTubers that are a part of. So if you've got a video component to your podcast, we tend to get a lot of trolls over there who start to hit and say nasty things about how you should be seen and not heard, or other things like that happen. We've done a whole podcast on that, but it does occur over there, and it can cause an emotional hit that causes a shutdown. So we do need to be watching when we're tapping into these fear points and this. And look, this is something that you might need more support on. This is where, if you've got a life coach, if you've got an executive coach, if you've got someone and you're starting to see these elements of fear and lack of confidence happen for you, you should work towards getting to move through this, because podcasting might be that one thing that removes that emotional barrier from everything that you do. It might be the thing that fixes it for you, that shows you that you are capable of doing this, that your voice has value. The biggest shift in an emotional barrier could be something like this happening for you. And it may be why everything in your life. So for those of you who maybe are not as woo-woo as others, right? But when you hit to something that is stopping you from doing it and you push through that, you might never have to face this in the universe again. Right? When you move through that. So this was something that advice somebody gave me when we started to get criticism from some trolls, and they were really only targeting me on our 3D print podcast and saying that I should shut up and let Tom talk about the tech stuff. And when I moved through that and said, that person's attack on me is not personal to me, because the value that I bring to our podcast and the value of what the perspective that I bring to making sure that people aren't tech talk too, and it's over their head. That perspective that I bring and the ability to do that in the process is tremendously valuable and is what's unique about our podcast. And when I moved through that, you know what? I never got another troll message again. Never happened again to us. No one ever sent nasty mail to us again, because I moved through that emotionally and didn't let it happen. Before that, it was happening kind of on a monthly basis. So this is something you can do.
That's a whole nother subject, how to deal with trolls, I think.
We did do a podcast episode and Feed Your Brand.
Yeah.
So we'll connect it in the blog post for this episode. Good. We'll make sure that happens. So that's it. So here's a couple of things that I think can help you. First off, get some support, because if this is an emotional barrier, it's an ongoing thing. It's affecting more than your ability to podcast. It's affecting more in your business, more in your life. Get some assistance here to move through anything that is fearful, confidence-based, anything like that. But here's something that if you find yourself procrastinating, there's something underlying here. Examine it. But here's also something else. This is a self-limiting barrier. This is not an outside barrier putting in. So you're the only one who can fix this. You can get assistance and help with it. Absolutely, that can happen. But an emotional barrier is a self-limiting barrier. It is stopping your voice from being heard. It is stopping your message from getting out into the world. So you're the only one who can fix this. So maybe what you need to do is get mad at yourself, right? We mentioned that we have people go completely quiet. That's what eventually procrastination leads to, is complete quiet. But I also see a lot of anger. Now, usually they lash out at us and say it's our fault. We're not helping them. We're not making this happen. But when we see anger like that, it actually is anger at yourself. And so we are not going to tell you that. We know it. And that's what we try to help our employees see, is they're not angry at you. They're actually angry at something that's going on in their own lives, in themselves. And so how can we make sure that we don't take this personally is something that we have to work on to assist our staff with, because we tend to take our anger out on others when it really is anger at ourselves. So get angry at yourself for holding your voice back. And maybe if you start to look at it from that perspective, you'll actually be able to snap yourself out of fear, because one of the best ways to get through fear is to get mad and move through something, right? And so thinking about maybe utilizing that as a superpower to help you move through this barrier could be a really interesting tactic. So rather than get angry at your team, at those around you, at your support system, get angry at yourself and say, I'm going to stop letting this block me from getting my voice out there, from getting my message out there. Maybe that's a way to look at it from a new perspective.
I relate to that, Tracy. I tend to get angry with myself more often than I want to admit.
I mean, for those of you who get angry at yourself and shut yourself down, that's not obviously the best tactic for you. But we do find that those who go real quiet, that maybe a little bit of anger, thinking about it like a 12-step program, right? Anger has to be in there somewhere. Parts of grief, anger's in there for a reason. Using it to your advantage can actually move you through something. And so that's what we kind of, asking for help is also one of those, right? So maybe if that's something you don't normally do, you normally do everything yourself, this point of asking for help can really make a big difference for you. And I really do think that podcasting might be that one thing that really changes this perspective on the world. This removes this barrier for you for all time. But you got to believe that yourself too. So help yourself through that. The last one that I have on my list, Tom, is overwhelm. And this is for a lot of people. Look, personal things get in the way. Families have illnesses and death, and you have things to deal with. Businesses have busy times of year. It has things that come up for you. And the most often the result I see is to start to say no. But I actually have a different strategy for overwhelm for myself that I'm just going to throw that out there for you, is that when you have too many commitments, too many ideas, and this is a pattern for you, my recommendation is to finish something. That what I found is when I do something and I finish it, I've actually shifted everything, and the level of overwhelm drops. Even though I maybe only took one thing off my plate, it drops tenfold. Like I have a significant drop in overwhelm feelings because the magnitude of overwhelm, it's like, you stack one thing, and then you tip over that tipping point to where you feel that overwhelm. Well, once when you remove something, it drops just as dramatically as it did when you were loading stuff on. And so that could actually shift you in a tremendous way. So by actually executing something and by letting go of some of that perfectionist or all the things that needed to be perfect to make this happen, and just moving through it to get it going, that execution of something can make a tremendous difference. By starting something, I now can assign it to someone. Right? If that one thing that I needed to do, if I just do that, now I can hand it off to a team. I can have an assistant support. I can actually take a lot more off my plate than I think I can by moving something through, rather than saying no. Because I find that sometimes saying no that isn't actually removing it off your list. You put it on that second page of the list where you're just like, I'll get to it later, but mentally you still got it there and it's still overwhelming you.
Well, so you tripped into a tactic of trying to get it out of overwhelm. And I think everybody has their own way that they need to get out of overwhelm. Not everybody works the same way. I am a list maker. I make lists all the time. And there are different kinds of list makers. There are some people that put all of that force rank all the things on their list by numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 through 20 or 50 or however big your overwhelm is. And I'm not one of those people. I make bullets. I don't put them in a particular order. But I agree with you, Tracy. Sometimes when you have overwhelm, putting those things down on a list and then being able to focus and concentrate on one thing at a time and cross it off the list can do a whole lot to get that overwhelm, that weight off your shoulders, out of your head. And then one of those things on the list can be, I'm going to record a podcast. And then you can actually do that and cross that off your list, right?
Well, and I also just look at examining things for people. Like a lot of times when I have a coaching call with someone, a private one-on-one strategy with them, when I really get them to take a look at this, they say, oh, podcasting is just another thing to add to my list. And I say, but what if my interview with someone was sales, marketing, networking, and content production, all in one single hour spent of my time? Does that change your perspective on what you've accomplished? Instead of I added one thing to my list, but I actually removed 4 others that I had to do separately. Now I can think about it differently, right? So this is where, again, systems, strategies, thinking things through. Then what's holding you back? What's overwhelming you with getting your podcast going? Maybe it's that mental block of perfectionism. What if I take that one away, get this thing going? And now I actually have taken 4 things off my plate that I don't have to do in separate execution. And now I can say no to some networking events. I can say no to some of these other things that might be taking up extraordinary amounts of my time. I can say no to something different that is actually overwhelming me in a bigger magnitude. So these are just some thoughts that we have about, barriers to getting your podcast going, getting in the flow, moving creative blocks as well, right? Because when we're overwhelmed, there's no way creativity can flow. It just can't happen.
I agree. It can't.
The brain is too busy, right? Creativity doesn't happen in the busy mind. Creativity happens and flows when there's space, when there's rest. So typically you might be thinking things through. You go to sleep and you wake up with an answer, or you take a shower, you go on a drive. This is what we hear creative techniques for people. Go on a drive, go take a shower, and all of a sudden the answer flows in. And it's not because the shower made creativity happen. It's because the shower forced your brain to not be thinking as much as it normally is, to zoning out. You're driving on a long straightaway, you're zoning out in a way, right? Hopefully you're watching the road, but you're zoning out of all the other things that are going on around you. You cannot do them. And when you don't do them, the brain has an opportunity to process the things you've been thinking about and turn it into the creative solution.
I really like that, Tracy. That was very helpful, even for me. Today, as we're recording, this is one of those days when I am overloaded with things to do, for sure. And I actually have enjoyed taking this break to record this episode. And
this is one of my favorite things, right?
It is one of my favorite things too. And it's also probably obvious to anybody listening and or watching this that you have the notes, you took the lead with this topic today, and I am your sidekick more than anything, and contributing as I can, but I didn't have the time to, prepare for this one, and that's unfortunate. But still, I enjoy showing up and participating, and it's, I sort of, feel pretty good after doing it. So I think it's sort of maybe a good example. Of course, I have to get back to.
It frees your mind, right? It frees
yeah.
your mind. It refreshes you. It can get you back into the excitement of something, the groove of.
And
things,
I really love doing it. I love doing it, and I love being prepared. And there are some days where you're not here, and I'm doing it alone, and vice versa. And I'm better prepared for those. And I, that's probably a little more enjoyable when I'm, more prepared for that, or when I record one at 6 a.m, when it's really my time of day. And I'm like excited and energetic. And I know you don't understand that, but that's okay.
Well, look, I get this question all the time. How do I manage to accomplish as much as I manage to do in a week, in a day? I've got kids. I've got, I work with my husband. I've got all this stuff going on. I'm running a company. We have 108 staff members around the world. Like, how do you do all of that? And to be honest with you, because I treat obligations extremely serious. So if I've got a phone call scheduled, if I've got I'm scheduled with you to show up here to coach you, there is very few things that will take me out of my ability to show up on that. And it also forces me to make the time to prepare, because I don't show up to something unprepared. It's not who I am. So yesterday we did our advanced social media workshop. And I didn't have a ton of time to prepare as much as I wanted to, but I did take an hour and a half earlier in the day to prepare all the slides, make sure it was everything that I wanted to, but it didn't mean I hadn't been thinking about it. And I was able to just assemble that and knock that out quickly because I was going to show up on that call and make sure it was done. That's a difference. Like, I force myself into a live situation, into an appointment, to do these things, because then I will execute. It will be off my plate, and we will have what we need as a company from a content standpoint, from a marketing standpoint, from information standpoint. I will also maybe have, in this sense, process through and thought, how am I going to help all of you get past this setup stage, right? How am I going to get you to get your show started? What do I need to bring to you to make that happen? Well, now I have a formula. I just was forced to think this through. And now I have a map that I can give to my team to help them. I have sound bites that they can pull from here to share, to inspire someone. Like, we got what we need to also continue to do more with that, because I took the time to make that happen. So this is what works for me, but hopefully you'll find something that works.
And
I
remember you said, unusually so for you, ahead of that workshop, you were not as prepared as you usually are ahead of time. I mean, in terms of preparing everything. And I'll tell you, you definitely pulled it off and showed up and did a great job, because I've already gotten feedback from some of the people that attended saying, wow, that was really valuable and useful, and they really appreciated it. They gave me feedback on, I mean, obviously it wasn't me, it was you, but in communicating with me,
that's great.
Customers that showed up and were part of it, like, wow, that was fantastic. And then, we're talking about whatever else we need to talk about. So,
but that's something that I think just right there, that's really freeing. Look, and it's not like I don't care to have good feedback, but it's not a necessity for me from an emotional standpoint. I don't require feedback immediate. I don't need immediate gratification for anything. It's just my personality. I'm lucky to have had that as a core part of who I am, that it's not required for me to feel good about what I did. I'm comfortable I put it out there. I know it's going to have the ripples that it needs eventually. I'm confident in that. When it does come back and I hear it, I think, oh, good. It did what I thought it was supposed to do.
Mhm.
Okay, great. Now I'll do more of that, right? Like it's a positive reinforcement that's needed. But because I don't expect it or need it immediately, I won't overreact to the fact that 5 people showed up on a call and not 50, right? It will never bother me because I know the 50 people will eventually get it. It just takes time. Podcasting is like that. And that's part of the problem for some of the people who require an immediate gratification. I need to see my stats spike. I need to see everybody love my podcast and rave about it. I need to hit the top of the charts. Those vanity metrics are not the best indicator of a good podcast. And that's where it can really fall apart. And we see a lot more pod faders because of that. But if you
All
can be
right,
patient.
Tracy. All right. Well, I think that's a great place to wrap the episode. You said it so well there. And wonderful. All right. Well, hey, everyone, thank you for listening. Hope you got some great value out of this episode. We'll be back next time with another great topic. Until then, it's been Tom and Tracy Hazzard on Feed Your Brand. So
Awesome.
I thought you were done there. I didn't really mean to
No,
cut
no,
off
no,
your
that's
last
okay.
thought,
No,
but I
it's
thought you
good.
had a good thought, and they could
Yeah.
probably edit it there, and then you sort of jumped on with another one. But anyway,
That's fine.
very true, Kevin. Marathon, not a sprint.
Oh.
And Kevin left. Oh well. And Scott.
Oh, we're so
Ah,
excited to hear that.
I'm very
Podcasting
happy
actually
podcasting
saved me.
saved you. Yes.
Yeah. I think that's the case. It's like sometimes we retreat. And when we're forced into a situation where we can't retreat because our podcast needs its interviews and do all of those things, we actually find our way through things.
Well, it's also your environment. You're in control of your podcast, and maybe out on social media, if you're getting beat up or something's going on, that's a tough space to be in. But on your podcast, that's your turf. You can be who
right.
you are. You can do what you want to do. You can accomplish what you need to accomplish without the noise. That's one of the wonderful things about it. The free speech, the complete control to do what you know is right.
Yeah.
So
you're welcome, Anne. I'm so
wonderful.
I'm good at getting people moving. Yeah. Hey, Cody.
I'm here.
The social media stuff.
Yes.
Can you drop the workshop chat in here? Because I do think that more people need to rethink their social media right now. It's the time of year when you should start analyzing and thinking about this. And the advanced class is probably the place to do that for most people. Rather than
so
the
those
starter
of you
class.
that are watching online on some of the streaming services or watching this recording, Tracy did the advanced social media workshop yesterday in a different way than she's done it in the past. I mean, every year you've done really a social media masterclass, I guess we call it, Tracy, with some updates. This was a little bit different, little longer format. And that's what I got really good feedback on from a customer of ours yesterday who participated full out in it.
Well, so often the advice that we're getting out there on social media is, I'm going to say anecdotal, number one. So it's like it worked for one person, but will you be able to make it work for you is totally questionable. The second part of it is that we don't take a look at it from the perspective of a podcaster. We take a look at it as the advice that's coming out of there is for someone who's being an influencer or someone who's doing or nurturing a group or some. And so if we don't understand the perspective of where that's coming from, we don't know whether or not we should apply it. That's what I think is the difference in what we really talked about this year in the class, as I was really talking about in the workshop. Let's take a look at what's working in general for most podcasters, why we do some of the things that we do it, and then let you decide whether or not you should take that in and maybe apply some of those to tactics that you're already utilizing. And so looking at it from that different perspective. And so this is a really good one for you guys to send to your assistants. Look, they think they know it all, like social media experts think they know it all, but the really good social media experts, the one that I find are the most, are the ones who experiment, who take a lot of feedback and input and consider alternative ideas than just following some 5-step advice that somebody who's a top influencer gave you in a course. That they're better at it. Because they're in the trenches, they're really trying stuff out. And so executive summary, I really can't because there were so many different aspects of it too. But basically, I was breaking up the idea of social media in terms of doing more advanced things with it, starting to manage multiple episodes, starting to launch with lots of business initiatives at once. You're past this, you're not really, and you're past the launch part, and you're not really ready yet for this next piece. So I'm going to say to you that I don't think I've already given you this advice. We already took you through these stages. So you don't need to do this because there's too much information that won't be useful to you. Too soon for you. This might be 6 months from now. I send you and have you watch the workshop, and then we have another session.
But you can go to that link Cody provided, and you have to sign up for the workshop in order to get the recording, even after the fact, even though it's already happened.
But you can watch the replay.
You can watch the replay. Yeah.
All you need to do is register, and you'll get access to the video, to the chat as well too. There's a couple links in there for you guys to explore all of the topics being talked about in that session.
Yep. The other thing is that our next one next week, Tom will be involved with the workshop. It's the ads and promotion workshop. So if you are thinking about taking ads in the future or running your own promotions, like for your books or your workshops or webinars that you might be doing, events that you might be running, we're going to have a workshop on that's going to have a couple of pieces to it. One's for those who don't do it yet, and one's for those that do already do it and maybe really taking a kind of introspective look at it and doing a better job at it or doing some new things that you might want to try at it in the next year. And part of it is that it's a combination of creative and technical. So like we do need to like really take a look at the options that you have and then creatively apply them for your own purposes, your own audience, the way the personalities of your audience are. There's no hard and fast rule to advertising. Otherwise, there wouldn't be gigantic firms making loads and loads of money out there producing ads, right? But so often I hear the failure in the ads and promotion market, and most of it is because it comes out of these digital marketing gurus who get Facebook ads, get the technical side of it and are hacking things, but they actually really don't have the sort of creative understanding and the audience understanding, the psychological understanding of how they all fit together. And so if you have all three sides, the psychological, the creative, and the technical, you can really do something wonderful.
Awesome. All right. Well, I think we're just about out of time. We don't have any comments online, Cody.
No comments online. We had some viewers on YouTube, it looked like, but not a lot of comments.
Okay, great.
Sounds good.
All right. Well, we'll wrap it up for today. We'll be back next week. Thank you all for those that attended live, whether it was here in Zoom. We had quite a few initially, and then on social. That's great. And we'll do it again next week. Until then, have a good one. And we'll be in December then. Holy mackerel.
Oh my gosh, I know.
Can you believe that?
Tomorrow. Crazy.
All
Bye,
righty.
everyone.
See ya.